الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور sorry. السلام عليكم. Okay. السلام عليكم.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما أما بعد. My dear respected brothers and sisters, Islam can be thought about as a response to a call that began some 1400 years ago when one God commanded one man, Iqra, read. Iqra bismi rabbik, read in the name of your Lord. From that calling grew a following, then a community and an empire, and it is what is before us today. But what is the essential nature of this divine calling? There are many words we could choose: peace, piety, honesty, and they would all be true. But there's one conception of Islam that I'd like to talk about at length today. That is a universal calling for justice. In Surah Al-Imran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, شَهِدَ اللَّهُ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ وَالْمَلَائِكَةُ وَأُولَٰئِكَ الْقَائِمُ بِالْقِسْطِ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهُ هُوَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ. Allah has witnessed that there is no deity except Him, as have the angels and those of knowledge, and He maintains creation in justice. There is no deity except Him, exalted in might, the wise. For only in justice can we find the pacification, the peace, the tranquility that we more often associate with the meaning of Islam. Only when the justice of Islam came to the Arab tribes, mired as they were in perpetual violence, idolatry, and the burying of their infant daughters, were the Bedouins able to establish one of the most impressive empires that the world has ever seen. The justice of Islam directs our individual actions, for when we accept and testify that there is one indivisible God. Justice mandates that we believe in him and that we carry out his edicts and commandments fully and without fail. The rest of the religion falls as a result of this. وَلَا تَلْبِسُوا الْحَقَّ بِالْبَاطِلِ وَتَكْتُمُوا الْحَقَّ وَأَنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. Allah reminds us in Surah Al-Baqarah, do not mix the truth with falsehood or conceal the truth while you know it. We all know, we all testify each and every day. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. There is one God and Allah is his messenger. We know the truth. We must not conceal it. We must follow every element of Islam. But Islam is many things. It's much more than just ritual, of course. To constrain Islam to the sphere of individual would be a great disservice to religion. After all, we are all people. We all exist in and are members of a society. No man is an island entire of himself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. The poet John Donne once said. Justice, then, in the Islamic and secular context, must always have a social component. It would not be enough to leave the commandments to individual piety, though that ultimately is the basis of a just society, as thinkers from Aristotle on have all recognized. Because with any collection of men, some will be less just than others. And that necessitates that there must be a system in place to ensure that the individual rights of every people, every person, is not being violated. We may deal honestly with one another, we may deal charitably with one another, but if society itself condemns people, condemns entire groups of people to inequity and depravity, then we may not just sit content with what we have ourselves done. We must also look to change the broader classification that society has designated on these people. From this individual failing of man, which Allah has recognized that there are some men who will be less just than others. There will always be good men, there will always be bad men. And from these bad men come fasad, corruption. The problem of corruption is what necessitates the existence of this social justice that I speak of. In Surah Al-Rum, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us, ظَهَرَ الْفَسَادُ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ بِمَا كَسَبَتْ أَيْدِي النَّاسِ. Corruption has appeared through the land and the sea because of what the hands of men have earned. And then he goes on to say, لِيُذِيقَهُمْ بَعْدَ الَّذِي عَمِلُوا لَعَلَّهُمْ يَرْجِعُونَ, so that he may let them taste part of what they have done, that they may return to righteousness. Corruption and fasad, and Allah also later in Surah Al-Baqarah says, Allah la yuhibbul fasad. Allah does not love corruption. Corruption is an entirely man-made concept, but is one that is pervasive. It is one that has existed in all times, in all societies. And it is one that the Muslim must, in his heart, feel an obligation to correct. One of the reasons that Pharaoh is regarded so heinously in the Quran was more than the depths of his narcissism and self-worship. It was more than his simple idolatry and his shirk. It was his subjugation of the Hebrews, their persecution and enslavement, and the murder of their children that earned him Allah's eternal anger. With all these people whom we read about, whom Allah has condemned, there is always an element of persecution of others. Abu Jahl, for example. At its core, of course, nobody will dispute this, Islam concerns itself with the internal struggle between righteousness and desire, between our fitrah and the nafs. It concerns itself with the ultimate battle to save our souls. But through the aggregation of each individual contest that you and I are going through, each contest between good and evil emerges a society. And the worth of that society, the goodness and evilness of that society, is the aggregate of all those individual contests. Evil is the internal evil that we have. That's what causes corruption. Every man is commanded to pay zakat and be charitable, yes. But what if society condemns entire classes of people to abject poverty, to dark slums without a ray of hope from the start? Yes, Islam commands us to treat our fellow man with dignity. But what if the society we live in condemns that very man to slavery, to constant and continuous discrimination? Though individual men may strive mightily in the way of justice, the enormous weight of societal pressure will ultimately leave the dispossessed and disenfranchised in the same position unless we raise our hands and unless we raise our voices. Inshallah. That is why justice must also have a social orientation, why it must leave the expanse of the individual and transcend to the level of social ethics. Our outlook must be systemic, for the fortunes of millions rise and fall on the inherent justice of our man-made institutions. We may be able to help 1 or 2 men. Perhaps Allah has blessed us with rizq, and we can help 10, maybe 100, maybe 1,000 men. But when you look at the way that society is itself organized, that is something that itself affects millions, in fact billions of people. There is much more of an opportunity to impact everyone when we look on the social level. Obviously, these are harder things to do, but inshallah, I hope that's something that we'll focus on as well. What I say then is that Islam is more than individual taqwa, than the prayer 5 times a day, than fasting in Ramadan, though that remains the essence of the faith, and we cannot have it without these things. But it is a position that I believe dates to the very origins of Islam, but it's one that unfortunately might have been lost. From the outset, to the polytheists of Mecca, Islam was a movement of radical social change. It called for upheavals of an intensely tribalistic society, one that relegated people to lives of depravity, despair for no other reason than the family that they were born into. And it called for an end to the nonsensical violence and reckless habits that had debased the Arabs. The entrenched social systems of Meccan society at the Prophet's time were the target of his teachings. And that is why the established powers reacted so brutally and repressively towards the early Muslims. And that is why the early Muslims largely drew from the poor and the slaves. And if we look through the Quran, we see that any time God's message appears on the earth, the followers of the poor, the followers of the disenfranchised, the people who exist in power, the people who have it comfortable, who have wealth, who have everything going for them, they're the people who are always resistant to change. These lower classes whom society had given up on and sought to reclaim their hope through the guidance of God are the ones who are the ultimate beneficiaries, the first followers of Islam. Sadly, many of our societies today, and especially the societies that many of us come from originally, our station in life is determined by the family or clan we were born into, the color of our skin, our richness and poverty, perhaps even our gender. There used to be an institution of the ethical scholar, the one who would challenge the existing power. Well, some of our very famous early scholars were thrown into jail repeatedly because they would not go along with the Khalifa, with what he said. Unfortunately today, some of our major institutions don't follow that same principle. If you look at the Azhar in Egypt, it's a center of great learning, and one that has provided us with so much knowledge and so much blessing, alhamdulillah. But it's also one that goes along with whatever the Egyptian government says. And I think that if we were to look at that, we would see that that's not what a scholar should be doing. A scholar should not be blindly following the word of the ruler. In fact, it is our duty to challenge what is being done, and it is our duty to say what is right, especially as scholars and especially as fellow Muslims. This is unequivocally wrong and inconsistent with the teachings of Islam. In his final khutbah, the Prophet ﷺ said, according to a report, "Indeed, your Lord is one and your Father is one. Indeed, there is no superiority of an Arab over a non-Arab, nor a non-Arab over an Arab, nor of a white over a black, nor a black over a white, except by taqwa. Have I conveyed the message?" They replied, "You have conveyed it, Messenger of Allah." We sit here, we are testifying that he has conveyed that message. How well we have followed it, how well it has been implemented, remains to be seen. As we have learned from the Prophet's wise saying, taqwa is the only acceptable differentiator among men and women. But it is not only the sole legitimate measure of a man's worth, but it is also one that, in Allah's boundless wisdom, is inherently invisible to us as flawed men. The only currency on the Day of Judgment shall be our taqwa, the sum total of our deeds in the precious few years that we have in this world, and that shall be the most valuable currency. And since it is true that only God himself knows the true worthiness of men, we are in no position to assess our brothers and sisters as worthy or unworthy. Doing so would arrogantly assume knowledge of an element of the unseen. And yet, we see Muslims doing the very same thing each and every day, accusing others who say, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, of being kafirs. Look at the bloodshed that happens in the Middle East on a daily basis. Sunnis killing Shias, Shias killing Sunnis, and all because we assume that we know enough to not only judge the worth of our fellow man, but also to condemn him to death. We look to the West as the source of our troubles, and there is no doubt in my mind that the persisting legacy of colonialism and support of corruption has exacerbated our troubles. Yet it is men who say they are Muslims who assume the cloak of dictatorship and repression, men who say they are Muslims who kill other Muslims in the name of a religion that they sorely misunderstand. We must all stand up and say, not in our name, not in the name of Islam, will these acts continue. Social justice, the grinding process by which we create a more just society, may only come through this basic realization that Islam was divinely organized as an ummah, a community that recognizes that men must be basically equal in order for fairness to rule and fitna to fall. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. Once we recognize the basic humanities of our fellow Muslims, something that sadly I believe is not found today as much as it should be, the rest of the nature of Islam must fall into step. A man who sleeps when his neighbor goes hungry is not one of us, the famous hadith reminds us. I am my brother's keeper, the famous biblical quote goes. In Islam, where we are all enmeshed in fraternity and sorority of faith and common citizenship in our ummah, we must all be our brothers and sisters' keepers. We must regard every suffering of our fellow person as deeply as if it afflicted our own family. Lest we forget, as sons and daughters of Adam, we are all from the same family, after all. Finally, I would like to take what I have said and apply it concretely to the facts of here and now. Here I stand, a Muslim born and raised in America, delivering this khutbah to you, American Muslims, in this beautiful masjid. I, like you, am an American. Its problems are my problems, and we must feel its shortcomings to the depths of our being. It is not enough to content ourselves to live within our cloistered communities, unaware and uninvolved of the debates and dilemmas roiling our country right now. If we do not become involved, we will be left behind, further than we already have. Right now, this country is being overrun with a debate on the way our black brothers and sisters are treated. A full 28% of Muslim Americans are black. Something that we often forget. But even if they weren't, even if that were not the case, even if they were not our own Muslims who are suffering, we must still care. We cannot sit idly by as these fundamental debates on justice continue. Right now, our black brothers and sisters in this country are pleading for the equality that should have been given to them after the Civil Rights era, which was promised but ultimately never delivered. When we read that unarmed black men are 7 times more likely to be killed by police than others, when we read that black teenagers are 6 times more likely to be arrested in this state, in the state of Kentucky, for crimes that white teenagers commit at the same rate, when we see the right to vote jeopardized across this union, we have a duty that I believe extends from our Islamic calling to speak and to act. As is narrated in one of the Hadith Nawawi, the Prophet ﷺ said, Man ra'i minkum munkaran falyughayyir biyadi. Whoever among you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. فَلَّمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ. And if he's not able to do so, then with his tongue. فَإِن لَّمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ. And if he's not able to do that, then let him feel bad in his heart. And that is the weakest form of the faith. Brothers and sisters, we have been blessed to live in a country where we may speak our minds any which way without any fear to our safety or our families. That was not a blessing available to the Sahaba, and not even available to many in our ummah to this day. We cannot squander it. عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروه يزدكم واستغفره يغفر لكم والتقوى ويجعل لكم من أمركم مخرجا. وأقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة